November 13th City Council work session. The first item is committee reports on items of interest. Do I have any councilors who have updates? Emily, take it away.
Downtown is updating every hour. I was at the National League of Cities in LA last week and learned a lot of things, which I'll talk about in the future. Probably people know the protesters are back at the Butterfly lot. I'm not surprised for a second. It was really hard to say or even think about saying, no, I don't want to cooperate with the county to get even more beds. But I didn't think that anything else would happen, and I was desperate to keep a downtown day center. So I'm grateful that that was included, but I think I would be happier if I had voted against my own motion. This is a problem that's not going to go away. It's not going to change, and we're going to have to change something. People don't like the way it is downtown, but we haven't changed anything downtown. Any shelter we put up will get filled. We'll always be dealing with the Ninth Circuit decision. So we need to decide how we're going to react, because 100 people just isn't enough, and people will protest. Imagine what it would be like if everybody on the street for, say, 30 days had a place where they could sleep every night, feel safe, take a shower, do their laundry, and be well fed. Maybe connected to services, but maybe not. Imagine what a difference there would be in our city if everyone could be clean, fed, and have rest. These are human rights, and we're getting caught up in too many other things. I know gentrification is inevitable, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to take care of everybody. I know money is a problem, it always is, but these are our people. Somehow we have to reach out and make a difference. And I really hope that people are understanding all the complicated sides. I know we can't fix it all, but a vibrant downtown is really important, and people that are alive is really important. So I hope that as the discussions unfold, we will remember to keep everyone in mind and push our possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Other councilors having updates? Betty, take it away.
Thank you. I was very disappointed to hear that we were not going to have the day center in the old City Hall lot. I was out of town at National League of Cities. I did object to having an extra meeting when people were not able to be there, which is what happened. And then there was a very important decision made in our absence. I thought it was one of the best things I'd heard when I heard we were going to use part of the City Hall lot for a homeless day place and storage and so forth, and I thought that was great, and then I was very disappointed to hear that we're not doing that anymore. I still think we need places to sit downtown. I still think that downtown belongs to everybody, not just the merchants downtown. And I know some of them objected to even having benches. I was talking to a man recently who took his mother downtown. She lives in a senior home. I don't know what kind of, I don't know him that well, but she enjoyed walking around for a while. She enjoyed the farmer's market, and then she would like to sit down, and there's no place. And I think a lot of people need a place to sit now and then, a place to rest. Then I got a call, which I accidentally cut off. So if that person's listening, I was going to call back. But a person complaining about speeding on McLean, and also asked the question, are we paying for the county patrol? Are we using our road money for the county sheriff's patrols? I think that's not true, are we? Okay, someone thought we were and wondered why, and thought we needed it all for roads, but I was sure it wasn't true, but I just thought I'd bring it up since someone thinks it's happening. And I wanted to point out, I wanted to say that in Los Angeles, the landlords pay $42 plus, I don't remember how many cents, per year for each unit they rent. And we have people here complaining about $10 a year, but I think they're going to raise it because they've decided it's not enough. They have an inspection every 4 years of every unit. And if there's something wrong, then they go back in 2 years. Some of the inspections, they said, do not take long because obviously it's a place that's taking care of all the units and they just look in. But there is that's what they do with the money. And I think we should consider inspecting all the rental properties too, and we probably should raise that $10 to something to pay for such a service. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, updates from things going on? Okay, two things. Yeah, Alan, go for it.
I did actually have one thing. It was from the Police Commission, and Jennifer, add anything if I forget, but one of the interesting facts that we, with the hirings that the police EPD is doing, by the time we get sometime towards the end or middle of this next year, with all the overhirings doing to then positions and retirements and stuff, we will actually be up to a full complement of police officers, meaning every authorized one has a person in it. And as far as I can remember, and I've been involved in 21 budgets in the city of Eugene, that's never been true. So this is the first time we've ever had. So kudos to the chief for getting that process in place and getting those people on board, and so we can get a full complement of police officers.
Manager, do you want to add?
Thanks, Mayor. Just real briefly, over the last couple days, I have had a chance to attend Veterans Day activities both at LCC and the U of O. Both of them were nicely attended, and I think it was just a nice way to sort of celebrate and honor and pay respect to veterans in this broader community. And we have a lot of veterans that come into our community through the schools. And so it's just nice to be able to attend both of those.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Comments? Greg.
Now, I guess I got myself elected to the National Board of Directors of National League of Cities this weekend, and I've been appointed by the president to a 20-member task force, National Task Force on Housing. And so those meetings are going to start early next year, and there's going to be a real big push to look at best practices as well as you know, trying to get the federal government to reverse some of the positions that they've taken in HUD and in other parts of the federal government that have negatively impacted us in terms of housing. So I'm looking forward to participating in that group.
Great. That is excellent. So, yeah, well, congratulations. It's really. So I have two quick reminders. One is that the third session of the Housing Tools and Strategies workshop is meeting tomorrow, 5:30 to 8:30, I believe, and it's at the Baker Center. So again, they're going to really dive into details around what tools are out there for encouraging housing. So encourage anyone to attend that. And the other, in response to Emily's comments, both the Poverty and Homelessness Board and the Shelter and Supported Housing Subcommittee of the Poverty and Homelessness Board are going to be talking about some very specific next steps, particularly that Chris McAllister has put forward. So I know you often come to those, and encourage anyone else who wants to listen to those meetings to come. I think we're going to try and bring some more voices to the table on that. So thank you for that. And then before we roll into our main topic, which is the town square, just especially for some of you in the audience, we will have the specific conversation about the eWeb property and that option. We will do that after this, in the 7:30 meeting after the public forum, in order to allow the public to express their opinion before we dive into that that discussion. So just so people know, and and then I think we're ready to roll. So, Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and Denny and Will. You want to come up and make your presentation?
Good evening. I'm Will Dowdy in Planning and Development. Once again, I'm excited to be here talking with you about the town square. I have a couple of project updates to share with you. Then I'm going to focus on budget and close with some next steps that are on the horizon. By way of introduction, I have a photo of the 2011 Celebrating Champions Parade. The parade ended here in the park blocks of all the public spaces in Eugene, because this is a place to celebrate together. And that's what it means to be a civic place, a town square. Things that happen here are special because they happen here. And this place is made special by the things that happen here. We want to carry more of this spirit, if not all the crowds, to each and every day of the year. The first step towards reaching this goal is the land exchange with the county. Last month, Lane County received a favorable ruling that no deed restrictions will prohibit the sale of the butterfly lot, shown here on the left in red, or the left red, prohibit the sale of the butterfly lot to the city. Our direction from you was to have this ruling in hand and be through the appeal period before December 1st. The county's timeline will get us there by the end of the month, and we're also on track to have an update to the appraisal of the two properties completed by that point. When I was here in July, we talked about the new approach we're taking. The Town Square project is a way to plan and build these different pieces in an integrated way. Building off the foundation set by PPS's placemaking plan, it starts with a concept design phase that involves public involvement and stakeholder outreach. At the end of October, just a few weeks ago, we released a request for qualifications for consultants to lead this process, and we'll have their responses next week, at which point we'll seek proposals from the top firms. Similar to the process for the downtown Riverfront Park, the consultant will use an iterative design process to engage the community. And they'll develop a guiding framework for the assembled town square. The concept design will include the basic program, massing, and features of each of the town square project components, the relationship between these parts, opportunities for unifying design elements, and preliminary cost elements. At the close of this phase, Council will have important decisions about the scope and allocation of funds for the park blocks and farmers market, as well as the decision to proceed to the architectural design of City Hall. And there's the RFQ. Now I'd like to turn to a couple of topics related to the town square budget, including the available funds, a look back at the 2016 cost estimate for City Hall, and a look forward. Each of the three legs of the stool have identified funding sources. The park blocks have up to $5.2 million of urban renewal, funds that can be spent here or in combination with other open spaces in the district, including Kesey Square and the Library Plaza. The farmers market has up to $4.5 million. In both cases, those numbers are maximums because the way that the plan was written, the different pieces are, the sum of the total projects exceeds the total amount that was allocated. So we'll sort out what the right amount is for each of those. Then there's also $11.3 million in the City Hall Fund. In addition to this, there may also be net proceeds from the sale of the property to Lane County, and the council will have the decision of how to use those funds. Now it's time for my sports analogy. One of the things that is easy to see in sports is that success is often directly connected to how you handle the times when you don't succeed. Athletes watch a lot of footage from their past performances. So in that spirit, I'm going to walk back through the costs from 2016 so that we can think about where we've been and our path to success. The numbers themselves don't mean much if you don't have a framework for them. Development costs are often put into three bundles: bricks and sticks, which is the physical components of the building and the labor that it takes to put them together; building design and project delivery; and the site itself, getting it ready for construction to begin. In 2016, the number for site prep was $2 million. The property was already owned by the city, but there was extensive demolition and a large area to prep. Actually, the cost includes work that was done on the entire block, not just in the area where the City Hall was going to be built. Design and delivery were $6.3 million. This includes the architecture, engineering, design of the building systems, as well as project management, permit fees, and SDCs. It includes the percent for art and the commissioning of the building to make sure that everything is working when it's all done. The bricks and sticks is $19.5 million. And I've broken that into a little bit more detail. The bulk of it, about $15 million, is simply the cost of the building as designed. That's the 4-story building with the council chamber and finished offices. It's the quality materials that are intended to be here in 100 years and everything inside. The parking and plaza are approximately $2 million. There's about $1 million each that's attributable to achieving higher standards for energy efficiency and seismic resilience. Now, council decided against the $1 million or the seismic upgrades, but I've included them here because they were included in the bid and they were included in the numbers that we last presented to you. Finally, there's about $200,000 that can be attributed to the reuse of elements from the old City Hall. That's the mural and the exterior cedar. Put it all together, the total cost came in at about $27.8 million. You can also look at this as about $870 per square foot. One note on using per square foot numbers, this is an all-in per square foot number. Sometimes people are just talking about the bricks and sticks numbers when they say per square foot. Sometimes they're talking about bricks and sticks and design and delivery. Sometimes they're talking about all of them. It makes a big difference. So this is a number that's everything included, is $870 a square foot. Now, you may recall that we did a comparison in early 2016 before getting the bids to figure out what sort of range to expect. We asked DCW Cost to look at comparable projects built between 2011 and 2017. Of these, they selected 5 that were the most similar to what we were proposing. You see the cities range geographically around the west. Some of the cities are larger than Eugene, some are smaller. Some of the projects are larger than ours, some are smaller. One thing to point out is there's a line for adjustment factor. Because the geographies vary, the different construction markets vary, and because of differences in time, this adjustment factor was intended to address each of those and basically adjust it to what it would be like if you were building that same project in Eugene. So you can see the calibrated numbers end up, the per square foot numbers anywhere from $427 a square foot to about $950, and our project falls on the upper end of that range. So that was 2016. Looking forward now, we have the opportunity to approach the cost proactively. The cornerstone of our new approach will be taking the budget we develop at the beginning of the project and using that as the guiding direction throughout the design process and at each decision point. It's not going to be easy, in part because of the cost escalations that our region is experiencing. Some estimates put this at around 25% increase over the 4 years from 2016 to 2020. That's daunting to say the least, but we will also focus on ways to reduce cost. We can incorporate design efficiencies in the project as we move forward. Not only do we have the benefit of the previous architectural programming and building design, we also can learn from our experience and emphasize a cost-effective approach throughout. Thinking of the City Hall in the context of the town square is an opportunity to review our desired outcomes for the building, making sure that the ways we express our values are aligned with our current needs and our current budget. And we are engaging an owner's rep as an independent project manager, someone who will help us keep the right focus on the budget from beginning to end. As we move forward, we will begin developing the project budget with you, specifically around a reasonable target for City Hall. We will also bring options for any additional funding sources to you. And I'll close by calling your attention to a few upcoming steps. As I mentioned, the RFQ for the consultant for the initial design and engagement phase will be wrapping up next week, at which point we'll ask the finalists for proposals. We're also going to be issuing a request for proposals for the owner's rep later this month. When you review Supplemental Budget 1, you'll see that it includes the allocation of urban renewal funds for the purchase of the southern half of the butterfly lot for the farmers market, which is in keeping with the downtown urban renewal plan. And finally, we are getting ready for the town square public involvement to kick off in March, and we'll have more details as we get closer. Thank you for this chance to talk about the town square project, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. That's a very clear outline. I have Mike in the queue. Anybody? Alan? Okay, Mike, kick it off.
Thank you, Mayor. Based on our current town square plan and the plan that based on the current town square plan, we're going to replace what we previously had as a city hall with 30,000 square foot chamber, as we all know what it contains. I'm wondering why if that's the plan to continue forever, because we have never discussed when Phase 2 occurs, or if, I know there are several, or at least one at this table who has said Phase 2 should never happen. So the $1.1 million or $1.25 million, or however you want to get to a fine pencil with that number, that we're paying every year in rent for that extra space downtown to downtown property owners, how is that allocated in the cost per square foot of providing a city hall? Because I don't see it up here. And with 125%, that looks like $1,088 a foot. And I don't see where we're capturing the cost of renting the other 70,000 square feet. Can you help me understand that?
The other 70,000 square feet is coming from, so is
We
it,
had a city hall that was central, that had 100,000 square feet, which has been during all of the discussion, what we know we need to consolidate city services. This council has decided that we will consolidate at some point in the future with Phase 2. No date specified, and as I mentioned, there have been some at the table who have said, maybe we never should. This council hasn't really decided. But until we have a date specific where we can reconsolidate or decide never to, where are we capturing the cost to rent the space that the city is using? Because we're not doing it here.
and I'll try to answer this and you can jump in too. So if we were trying to build a 100,000 square foot project and this one was 30,000 square feet, so that's the 70,000 that you were talking about. And I think the amount of rent that we're currently paying, that would be that difference, because we did some of this back when there was the conversation about eWeb, which is the 100,000 square feet you're probably talking about. Is my
Our
assumption.
policy decision, forgive my interruption, our policy decision to take only the first bite of this at 30,000 square feet, that decision not to replace the whole amount has a cost
About 1.5
that's not
million.
represented in this discussion.
Right, that's about 1.5 million per year of rental cost in the downtown. That's for that 70,000 square feet, plus or minus.
The council hasn't decided when or if that ends. If it ends 20 years from now, that's, another 30 million that we need to add to the cost of this, I would suggest, in my opinion, because in not consolidating, the not consolidating has a cost that in an apples to apples comparison to any other option, we should be capturing for an honest discussion.
And where the council has been, you're right, there's that 1.5 that represents that 70,000 square feet. Where the council has landed to this point in the land exchange is the Phase 2 actually shows up in what is the current courthouse.
It's a potential. We
Right.
have a right of first refusal.
In what year?
It doesn't, yeah, whenever they vacate the property.
So if at some point in the future, 10 years from now or wherever many, we can raise the 60 or 70 or 80 million dollars to do that, then we're going to have to add the cost of rent and that in order to get an apples to apples comparison to 100,000 square feet. Is that fair?
I think the way I would say that is that if you had 100,000 square feet right now, that's going to cost you a certain amount of construction cost. It precludes some rental costs. That's at 1.5 million, assuming that you build a whole 100,000 square feet. And then I'm trying to just work through your question. So if in 20 years, that's the time where that additional 70,000 square foot cost occurs, you would have the cost of the capital and you would have paid rental costs through that
30 million.
20 years, whatever that number is. So you're right, you would have paid all those costs for that period of time.
I'm just saying for my last second, in this discussion, it would be nice for us to capture that cost for accurate comparison.
Alan?
Yeah, a couple questions about that graph right there. The RFP, is it just for the yellow part, or is it for
all the other colored bars as well.
Yes, at this point, what we are looking for is someone to do the yellow part, which is the comprehensive look at the entire town square project. Right, and that's, and to set kind of the guidelines for how the other pieces then get developed. We will, once we get to the end of that town square project, and assuming that there's full support of going forward with every piece of the project, then we will probably do individual procurement for each of the, for designers for each of the pieces. But we also need to work through what's the best way of achieving that, whether we go with a design build firm or for one of the pieces or all of the pieces, or exactly how that works out. So right now, we're just having someone to come in and do the initial look at everything, and that will set up that'll set us up as we move forward with the individual parts.
Right, because you could see the farmers market and City Hall being very integrated and maybe needing to be the same one, but maybe not the park block.
Sure.
For instance, okay. Mike, you should be careful about the rent savings question, because we asked that question in December 14th, 2016. We got a memo from staff that actually did that, and contrary to some people's belief, it's not true that consolidation actually decreases our costs. You don't just get rid of the $1.2 million of rent and nothing else happens. You actually have to pay the utilities and the debt service and all the other stuff. And for the eWeb building, for instance, it was a net increase of $750,000 a year that it would cost us to give up those cheap rents with utilities included to move into a new space. And for just the City Hall 32,000, that's for the 100,000 square feet. And for the 300,000 square foot City Hall, that was about 32,000 square foot City Hall, that was about $300,000 a year. So because where we are in the rent cycle, it's actually cheaper for us to rent than it is to move into a new space with debt service and all the costs associated with that. Last question, going back to the cost per square foot. Can you pull out that slide? Yeah, that one.
This one? Oops.
That one, yeah. So in the comparison, we tend to be on the high end of that scale, not at the top of it, but certainly not at the low end at 425. So can you go over that and account for why ours is so much more than, say, the ones in Chandler or in Arizona?
I don't know why it is that's the case. That's one of the things that we would start off this project by looking at, is figuring out, we now have a sense of where we are in the spectrum, and so that's one of the benefits of taking another shot at this, is that we can, we understand, it's like running a race and coming in second or third, is you have a pretty good idea of who beat you and how much you need to improve. So this gives us a good benchmark, and it gives us an opportunity to figure out, to do a pretty good study of some of these projects and figure out, are these the kinds of projects that we can we achieve costs like this, or is it because they didn't have some of the same values that we did, or are there situational differences that account for us, or is this something that we can achieve?
One of the things you might point to is that we demoed in an entire city block for a 32,000 square foot building. That's not very efficient. You typically wouldn't do that probably for a building of that size. So there's probably some inefficiencies. It was also a long design process, and so there's some costs probably embedded in that. We haven't really dug into every aspect of that, but I think the message we're trying to convey is there's probably some efficiencies that we can find moving on to this site. We just need a little bit of time to kind of figure out, can we get there or not? And we believe there are definitely some efficiencies. If you look at the site, the larger project, maybe you don't have to design or pay for the plaza. In the old City Hall, we had the plaza as part of the project. Now the plaza kind of becomes the farmer's market, so there might be some efficiencies there. But at this point, we need to spend more time on that at this point.
Yeah. And good sports analogy, Will. I expect next time you come here, you do an automotive analogy, since those are the two most prevalent ones. When we come back, I guess there's two ways to look at these costs. One is the totality of the project, like we're doing here. The other one is incremental costs. And while I see the need to talk about the totality of it, including all the, if you go back one slide, it's about $8 million that's sunk costs. We already spent that, and we're done. And we by shifting around what we've done, we actually wasted a lot of money, maybe $2 million of that, but that the county's going to reimburse us for somewhat, but not all of it. So I'm also interested in just seeing the incremental cost of where do we go from here, how much does it cost, how are we going to pay for that to move forward, and what are all the elements, especially since it's in the town square project with different elements to it.
Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Going back to slide 7, one of the things I recall we had discussed at one point was as far as the farmers market footprint was the possibility of having a residential development either on top of that or part of that in some form or fashion. And I don't recall us having talked about any kind of combined development with a commercial element that could possibly reduce our cost or, mitigate some of the cost of putting together this town square project. Do you recall we talked about that?
Related to this project or the
Yeah, related to this project. Particularly when we talked about the farmers market, I remember some designs that we had looked at that would incorporate a 5 or 6 story residential development either on top of that or adjacent to it.
We haven't received any direction at this point to start designing in commercial elements. As I recall, in the old City Hall project, there was some discussion about some complementary commercial development on the block, but at that point, we were really just talking about phase 2 of City Hall. We really didn't ever start looking at that seriously, so that's not something that we've spent time on. However, one of our goals is to start to turn around the buildings around the park blocks that now kind of turn their back on the park blocks. And so I think the complementary commercial element, a lot of that we hope really is comes out over time around the park blocks to complement kind of the town square project.
Wouldn't we be looking at incorporating a commercial element into this design as we're, kind of moving forward with this? And not just be, I think of a public square as a public square, but also as having certain elements of commercial development that are integrated within that public square design that kind of enhance the whole ambiance of that. If I go to the, other downtowns, you'll see, there's a public element and then there's also various commercial pieces that are developed within the design of the public square. And I think that this could be a way to enhance not only the design of what we're looking at, but also maximize land usage and, possibly giving us other streams of revenue and engagement on the public's behalf if we've got people living on the property as well as, having commercial interests within the property.
It's not an assumption that we've started off with, but
I'll give you an example. Beaverton City Hall is, part bank building, part City Hall. And they have a parking structure associated with that. And shops and all kinds of different things.
I mean, the commercial that we've taken into account so far is the 2 markets, but without that being an assumption going into the project, that's part of the reason to do this comprehensive look at the town square and to be having conversations about the overall design and and talking to the community about the overall design, because there's an opportunity for ideas that aren't part of the the assumptions that we come in with, for those ideas to come in and really change the project and express the best outcomes in the community interests.
Well, I'd like to throw in there the thought of, commercial and residential as being part of the overall design of the town square. I think it would enhance the utility of the project for a long period of time.
Chris?
Thank you. Interesting presentation, particularly in terms of trying to provide some more clarity around what some of the things we could do and what the costs would be. And I realize that you're trying to project what you think would be the impact. I'm mindful of the fact that every year we wait, the price tag goes up. Whatever it is we plan to do, it just gets more expensive to do it. I would have liked to have built City Hall 3 years ago. But unfortunately, that wasn't how things are going to play out. It's easy to get negative about this project. It's easy to get negative about all the different variables that seem to have a negative aspect to them. So I really want to kind of focus on what for me would be, I think, the best outcomes with what it is we're trying to achieve. And for me, a best outcome would be a place Eugene could be proud of. And that's not building specific, but it is saying whatever it is we do, it can't be a Butler building, it can't be a tent. And I realize there's a lot of cheap ways you can get to a city hall. And I'm looking for not a palace, but I'm also not looking for something that's not going to be respectful to the community. So I'm looking for that balance. I want something we can be proud of. And does that need to be big? Does it need to be small? What size does it need to be? And I was actually talking with somebody about what size does it need to be, and I'm going, we're not maybe necessarily entirely sure what that needs to be. We do know we need an assembly space for people to meet with their leaders. That's a council chamber, a place where people can come, like this. That's a given. We have to have that. So that's why all along I've always thought the administrative center, the gathering place, the council chambers, was the first phase, the first thing you need to absolutely make sure you have in place. So I'm approaching it from a best case of what can we do to make sure that that assembly and administrative space is taken care of, wherever it is we plan to take care of it. The next question then is, the best outcome is, what is the best place for the 500 plus employees who work in this general area? Right now, they're in downtown. They're paying rent, but they're in downtown, and they're contributing to the downtown economy. And I would love to have the cost of those people downtown be low, even as I want the economic benefit of those people to be high. So that's another outcome I'm looking for. I want those 500 employees to provide a good outcome for the downtown area at a minimal cost for us. And I don't know whether that's in a phase 2 or not. I'm not going to say we don't need a phase 2, but I don't know what phase 2 should look like. And so for me, I want us to go back and take another look and say, what does it cost for us to achieve our best outcome? And I don't have a complicated or long list in terms of the best outcome, because it doesn't have to be something giant or palatial. It's just what meets the basic need.
Anybody else needing to weigh in? I have a, and I know Mike wants a second round, just kind of following up on Chris's comments. When the council went through this process in 2016, you established a set of values that you wanted this city hall to express. And so I'm assuming that you're going to go back to that, because I guess I think it would be helpful if we were looking at those values with this larger concept in mind, not just, and we looked at it just in terms of what that city hall building could be like, but, and I don't remember that whole list of values, so I think it would be interesting for us to have a chance to look at those values again, also because some of them added costs, and maybe that will feel different this time around. Any other questions, concerns? And Mike, second round.
Thank you, Mayor. Those values, I agree, were a council majority decision, and by staff's estimation will cost about $1,088 per square foot if we build it in the butterfly lot tomorrow in this plan. I appreciate Alan bringing up that consultant's report because it has also been reported on in the newspaper. Those bits of information as if they were a good starting point, and it allows for some of that misinformation to be addressed now. For example, the part you just mentioned about the energy costs. On December 9th of 2016, well after we were done with the conversation in that report, Frank Lawson, the general manager of eWeb, got a memo from his staff that detail all of the things that had been upgraded in that building, as well as a detailed report about energy efficiency that contradict that consultant's report, as well as work they have done since. But if you took, for example, which I think you can make a wonderful argument that there's no way that the eWeb building, for example, would cost $48 million, which is the way that comes out if we did all of the things that the consultant report says. At 100,000 square foot, that's still $480 a square foot, not 1,088. And that's the fundamental difference here, because I don't think the number's anything close to that. And that means we stop paying rent to a bunch of other places, and we're not capturing that cost in that 1,088. If we were to capture it somehow, it would raise that number. So while I agree with Chris entirely that our best outcome should be to look at what serves the best purposes, and that means that there may be some compromises to accomplish that. But certainly from a standpoint of economical calculation and comparison, my point is we don't know enough to make that comparison right now, because some of those pieces of information we've had in the past are now dated, and some of them are conflated, and we don't know what this number will be, and we don't know those numbers anymore because there's a whole different staff there. So I would say until we have better information to make a good calculated information about our best outcome, it's best not to decide today. Thank you.
Comments? What? Yeah, Alan.
Can you go back to the last slide with the 4 bars in yellow? So the part that's the park box portion of it. Mm-hmm. The blue part. Can you talk about that? We've talked ad nauseum about the farmer's market. Sure. We've got $4.5 million ready for that, but the park box part, talk a little bit more about what that would look like and how it interacts with the farmer's market.
Yeah. Well, what it's going to look like is actually the big question, I think. If you recall, when we were talking about the urban renewal plan amendment, we discussed a wide range of what work on the park blocks could entail. And that's everything from getting the bulldozers out and starting from nothing, and just kind of minor tweaks around the edges. And part of the process that was laid out at that point was to do more community engagement and to figure out what's the right approach. So the first step we did was working with Project for Public Spaces to think about, they call it a placemaking plan, and really it's thinking about the uses and the way the space works. It's the program, it's the functions that are involved. They show designs, but the designs aren't meant to be prescriptive designs. They're meant to show how all of those activities can take place within the space. And so that's the first part. And the next part is going to come up in this public involvement and concept design phase for the town square. Because the park blocks, figuring out how the park blocks work together, this would be the 3 park blocks that we're talking about, 1 north of 8th and 2 south of 8th. Understanding how they work, thinking about them holistically with the City Hall building and the buildings that ring around them and the county building. This is the opportunity to make sure that we have consistency and we have a unified harmony, and which is not something that we've done before. And so if we're going to treat it as one space, this is our chance to think about what should that space include. Now, that being said, there's a lot of people who use that space. We've been talking with the Saturday Market back since working with PPS, and we continue to talk with them. There's the Farmers Market has been using that space. We have event staff who hold events there. We've got people who just come to use the park. Like any other citywide park, there's people from all over who see this as their space because it is their space, and it's also part of the downtown neighborhood. So, we need to take all of that, and then we need to figure out what's the right approach. And so until we get through that yellow spot, I don't know exactly what the work on the park blocks is going to entail. We've certainly set up a wide range of opportunities, but we'll get there, and then we'll figure out what's included in that.
Yeah. Okay. And Mike, the report that you're referring to, this one, done in 2016, actually was done not by staff. It's not a staff estimate. It was purposefully done with local, credible experts in the industry, some of the best that we have in our city. Cameron McCarthy, Robertson, Sherwood Architects, KPFF Engineering, Hoback Lewis Structural Engineering System, West Engineering for the mechanical electrical systems. Those are the experts that we hired to do that analysis. They're local firms with great experience and very high integrity. I'm not going to second guess their work. I think that they did a very admirable job of the task they were given, which is to compare the UWEB to the other options. And I think they came up with a fair, credible number of what it would take to build out that whole 100,000 square feet, which was about $48 million on top of buying the property. So there's a lot of things. It's a 30-year-old building. It has a lot of issues with it.
Claire.
Thank you. So I don't have a lot of questions, but I did want to ask about something, Denny, that you mentioned, and that was about trying to get the buildings that currently have their back, as you put it, away from the park blocks, which I think is a really important piece of this whole idea of revitalizing the park blocks. And what are some ideas we might have, some strategies we might employ to get those buildings to reorient?
Yeah, I think if you look at what happened downtown generally during the recession, which was 300 million plus, we used a lot of tools, whether it was urban renewal or loan programs or MUPT or federal programs, parking, all kinds of tools that kind of, and we've talked about needing to have the toolbox of kind of tools to really make an impact. And so I think it would be opening up that toolbox and figuring out through the loan program, for example, how can we work with some of the property owners to start making some improvements that may turn those buildings around, so to speak. Working with tenants who might go into the ground floors of those buildings. We've done that for years, and we've had tools downtown. That's one of the fortunate things about downtown is we do have a toolbox, and we can use that to kind of push things forward. And so that's what we would expect. It's going to happen over time, just like downtown is happening over time. And I think there's always, people always talk about mixed use. There's, kind of vertical mixed use, and there's horizontal mixed use. The horizontal is a lot easier to pull off. It's a mix of uses that are scattered around, and I think that's where we would start. It's possible we could put mixed use within a city hall building, for example. That gets a little harder and more complicated, but we could look at both. But I think the best place to start is the commercial and retail and services that are surrounding the park blocks.
Yeah, and it's tricky because we've got, commercial realtor's office, we have a bank of, financial services, we have the court reporter's business, so these are not retail businesses with, welcoming storefronts that are inviting or have eyes on the street. So, it's a real challenge, I think. So I'm just planting the seed now that you're thinking proactively about that, so it's not trailing so far behind us as we're doing the good work on the park blocks. And then, this is probably not a popular idea, but I'm just going to throw it out there. If, wondering if there's any appetite for considering reconnecting the two park blocks together, which would mean closing off that section of Oak. We see in historic photos that this is one large park. before we intersected it with streets. And I would at least like it to be part of the conceptual conversation about whether that's at all reasonable to consider. I think it would make a huge difference in creating welcoming pedestrian environment and utilizing that area even more if we gave up that square footage for our cars to drive through. I use that thoroughfare all the time, so I would have to reroute myself, but I just want to put that out there as being in the mix of what we think about, so that we're not just limiting ourselves that we have these discrete blocks and that's all we can do.
Chris.
Thank you. I'm going to work really hard to not be drawn into making this a conversation about City Hall on the Butterfly Lot or City Hall at the eWeb building or whatever. That's a conversation for later on this evening. Let's go back to the town hall conversation and something actually that Greg said that I thought is a really important one, which is talking about part of the success of this whole town square concept will be in its mixed use. That it can be a government center. I think that's great. But it also needs to be a commercial and residential center as well. And you talked about the buildings that are facing away from the park blocks, turning their back on the park blocks, so to speak. I think that is an enormous opportunity for redevelopment. And I know for some people redevelopment is a scary word, but I think if we really and truly want to make this town square a town square in the mixed use kind of way that will ensure its success, it's going to require significant redevelopment. Because right now the buildings surrounding the town square currently are underutilized, one, maybe two-story buildings that are older. They're not the kind of things you want to have in your town square area. So I think we need to talk about what it will take to reorient the buildings and make them more what needs to be in a vibrant downtown. And I am not naive to think that that can be done just by the private sector alone. In fact, I believe it will have to be a public and private partnership that will make that happen. So for me, to get back to the conversation now, it's what do we need to do as a city to help ensure that this town square, from the mixed use standpoint, is supported, encouraged, and developed as much as it possibly can. What do we need to do financially? What do we need to do in terms of incentives? I think that's a word that downtown really needs, is what do we need to do to get the kind of development downtown that we want? We've learned many years ago that if you just take your hands off, downtown falls apart. You know, I saw that happen for 10 years. And when we put our hands back on it, and this is really in great part thanks to you and your predecessors, when we put our hands back on the steering wheel, downtown started to revitalize. We still have a long way to go, but it will only happen with our participation. So I want this public involvement and concept design process to incorporate the notion that this town square, yeah, whatever it's going to be in terms of government center, also needs to talk about what it's going to be in terms of a commercial and residential center as well, and how those will interact and incorporate. And to me, all of the buildings surrounding the current park blocks are a prime start point, because right now they're underutilized and a prime candidate for that kind of development.
I have one other follow-up question for you, which is, you refer to this in the AIS, and we've talked about it before, about 8th Avenue as a great avenue. And so I wonder if you could reflect on that a little bit in terms of how this thinking about the park blocks relates to that other concept that you're working on.
Sure. In the 2004 downtown plan talks about four great streets. Willamette as the north-south one, and then 5th, 8th, and Broadway as east-west streets. And each one offers something different to the community. What 8th does more than any other street is it connects downtown with the river. At least it ought to. And so we're working on the east end of it. That needs a little bit of attention down there. But this becomes an opportunity for us to really realize that vision of Willamette to Willamette. And it's a half-mile walk, which is about a 10-minute walk for the average person. And so that's actually a pretty achievable thing for someone to do. Someone who's, on a lunch break, they can spend their lunch break at the river with a nice 10-minute walk each way at the beginning and the end. So that's been the big opportunity. One of the things we also talked about with 8th is that it lends itself to being a civic street. And that's one of the differences between it and 5th or Broadway, is that it happens to be where we have the park blocks, the county, the old City Hall block and the City Hall site. It's got the federal building, and then it takes you to the river. And so, so there's an opportunity to have it be something a little bit different than some of those other streets. So, Public Works is working on ways that 8th can be improved, ways that access can be improved along those. One of the longstanding concepts is to bring it back to being a two-way street. But however all that goes, the overarching concept is that this becomes the connection point between our downtown park and our downtown riverfront. And so there's of course other ways to get around, but this has a very strong connection.
Okay, thank you. And so that, I mean, for most of us, it's actually even hard to envision that, because it's hard to envision how you get from one side of all those major roads to another side. And so that sounds like a...
So that's the challenge. People talk about, when we talk to people about what do they want to see for 8th, the main thing that we heard was we just want to get to the river. And they would point out, a few barriers. One of those is the Mill Street crossing is not easy. It's better than it used to be. The other thing they'd point out is the railroad crossing, or that short little bit to get from the through the, well, it's going to be the future park space along the river. And so each one of those is an opportunity for us to make it a little bit better.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much. So just so I know, so when will we come back to this conversation, and what's the next phase going to be?
I don't know if we have a specific date. We will, I mean, one of the next opportunities, one of the next things that we will need to talk about is how we start crafting that budget. We will be working with our owner's rep to get through that, and so I don't know exactly when that timing is, but that's those are kind of the next sequential events, and that'll be the next thing we'll really need to talk about.
Okay.
Although I suppose there will be maybe other things that will come up first.
Okay, good, fair enough. Thank you very much. Thank you, and I think that's our last. Oh, we could do the consent calendar. Aren't you clever? Yes. That annexation. Oh, do we need to leave that? Oh, we don't do consent. Well, okay, so I guess we'll just close. The consensus is we should just close. So we're adjourned until 7:30.
Good try.
It was.